The process of Ukraine's incorporation into the Soviet Union. Ukraine, also known as Little Russia, shares cultural roots with Russia and Belarus, all inheriting from Kievan Rus. Geographically, Ukraine lies between Poland and Russia, with western Ukraine bordering Poland, Hungary, and Romania, while eastern Ukraine connects to Russia. This geographical difference has been a significant factor in Ukraine's divisions. To trace back, starting from the October Revolution in 1917, the overthrow of the Tsarist Russian regime led to the establishment of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in eastern Ukraine. This indicates that there was indeed a distinction between western and eastern Ukraine. During the period of the Russian Civil War from 1918 to 1920, western Ukraine was occupied by Poland. In 1922, the Soviet Union was established, and the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic became one of the founding members. According to the Treaty of Riga signed in 1921 between Poland and the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, western Ukraine was incorporated into Polish territory. Then, in November 1939, with the outbreak of World War II and the partitioning of Poland, western Ukraine was merged with the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. The political divergence between eastern and western Ukraine. On July 16, 1990, the Parliament of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic passed the Declaration of State Sovereignty of Ukraine. On August 24, 1991, the government of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic issued the Declaration of Independence, and Leonid Kravchuk was elected as president. This officially announced Ukraine's independence from the Soviet Union and marked the end of 337 years of alliance with Russia, establishing Ukraine as a sovereign nation. On December 8 of the same year, the leaders of Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus signed the Belavisa Accords in Minsk, declaring the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the formation of the Commonwealth of Independent States. However, significant political differences remained between eastern and western Ukraine. Viktor Yushchenko, elected president in 2004, represented the pro-European political orientation of western Ukraine. In contrast, Viktor Yanukovych, elected president in 2010, embodied the pro-Russian political inclination of eastern Ukraine. The conflict between Ukraine and Russia at the end of 2013, the political crisis in Ukraine erupted when Yanukovych refused to sign a free trade agreement with the European Union. This refusal led to massive protests by the opposition, demanding Yanukovych's resignation and early elections. In January 2014, despite making some concessions to the opposition, Yanukovych was ultimately forced out of power. This move was intolerable for Russia, as Ukraine's pro-European stance represented an eastward expansion of the EU and NATO, which posed a significant geopolitical threat to Russia. In response, Russia began to exploit the divisions between eastern and western Ukraine to counter the pro-European government in Kiev. First, armed groups in Crimea seized control of key political and military locations. In March 2014, following a controversial referendum, Crimea declared independence and subsequently joined the Russian Federation. Following this, regions in eastern Ukraine, such as Donetsk, Kharkiv, and Luhansk, also declared independence. Despite repeated military attempts by the Kiev government to suppress these movements, fierce fighting ensued, resulting in significant casualties on both sides. On July 17, Malaysia Airlines flight MH17, traveling from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, was shot down over Donetsk by an SA-11 missile, killing all 298 people on board and causing global outrage. However, the Ukrainian government, Eastern separatists, and the Russian government all denied involvement in the attack, and hostilities continued. By September 5, representatives from the Ukrainian government and Eastern Ukrainian armed groups reached an agreement in Minsk, signing the Minsk Protocol, which included a ceasefire. The agreement officially took effect at 1400 hours Greenwich Mean Time that day, yet fighting persisted and has not ceased to this day. The United States and the European Union jointly refused to allow Russian President Putin to attend the G8 summit and decided to extend economic sanctions against Russia. Coupled with falling oil prices, Russia's economy faced severe challenges. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian parliament passed a bill to abolish Ukraine's status as a non-aligned country, paving the way for its potential accession to NATO and the EU. Current situation in Ukraine. Since President Trump took office in 2017, the situation in Ukraine has not improved. Armed forces in eastern Ukraine continue to clash with the Kyiv government, and Russia maintains its occupation of the Crimean Peninsula. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley has repeatedly criticized Russia, accusing it of wrongdoing in its occupation of Crimea and its support for the independent armed forces in eastern Ukraine. In August 2017, the U.S. government even discussed the possibility of providing lethal weapons to Ukraine but ultimately decided against it, fearing an escalation of conflict. During a visit to Ukraine on August 24, U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis reiterated American support for Ukraine and condemned Russia for violating the Minsk agreements and annexing Crimea. He warned that if Russia did not improve its behavior, the U.S. would continue to impose sanctions but indicated that the U.S. would seek diplomatic solutions to the Ukraine issue. However, the next day, Mattis stated that the U.S. would actively consider providing defensive lethal weapons to Ukraine. On December 13, the U.S. government notified Congress that it would allow arms dealers to sell lethal defensive weapons to Ukraine. This action naturally provoked outrage in Moscow, which believed it would only lead to more bloodshed. Nevertheless, the U.S. remained undeterred, with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson warning Russia that mishandling the Ukraine issue would become a significant diplomatic obstacle between the U.S. and Russia. On December 27, a prisoner exchange occurred between the Kyiv government and the armed forces in eastern Ukraine, mediated by the Russian Orthodox Church's patriarch. This development seemed to signal a glimmer of hope for resolving the Ukraine issue. However, the Kyiv government remained wary of eastern Ukraine, bolstering its military presence and passing a bill in parliament for the reintegration of Donbass. They accused Russia of being an aggressor nation, which triggered protests from Russia, asserting that Ukraine's parliamentary actions were tantamount to preparing for a new war in eastern Ukraine. Russia even suggested that the timing of Ukraine's parliamentary decision coincided with the U.S. preparing to provide lethal weapons to Ukraine, implying that Ukraine was acting recklessly with American backing. As of February 3, 2018, reports indicated that 3 Ukrainian soldiers had been injured in Donbass, allegedly by Russian-backed armed groups, with the Ukrainian authorities accusing these actions of violating the Minsk agreements. The conflict between the two sides has continued unabated. Continued conflicts between Ukraine and Russia. Since then, conflicts between the two sides have persisted, leading to several significant events in Russo-Ukrainian relations. The first was the assassination of Alexander Zakarchenko, a prominent separatist leader in eastern Ukraine, on August 31, 2019, in Donetsk, which sparked great discontent in Russia. The second event occurred on November 11, 2018, when the two self-proclaimed independent regions, Donetsk and Luhansk, held elections for leaders and representatives. The Kyiv government not only refused to recognize the election results but also conducted artillery strikes in the Donbass conflict zone. The third major incident took place on December 19, 2019, when the Russian Coast Guard opened fire on Ukrainian vessels attempting to pass through the Kerch Strait into the Sea of Azov, capturing 24 Ukrainian sailors. In response, the Kyiv government protested and declared a state of emergency in 10 provinces near Russia for 30 days. The tense standoff between the two sides continues to escalate. In eastern Ukraine, tensions have remained high. Starting in February 2021, renewed conflicts erupted, resulting in casualties among government forces. By April, the Ukrainian president emphasized that Western nations should immediately agree to Ukraine's NATO membership. Notably, Russia began amassing troops near the Ukrainian border in March 2021, citing the tense situation in eastern Ukraine as a justification. Russia claimed that Ukraine's actions posed a significant threat to its national security. Subsequently, in June 2021, Russia withdrew some troops, slightly easing the tense atmosphere. However, Ukraine has not abandoned its pursuit of NATO membership. Although NATO has been hesitant to allow Ukraine to join due to concerns about relations with Russia, it has granted Ukraine enhanced opportunities partner status and engaged in military exchanges and cooperation. Following this, the Ukrainian president visited the U.S. to request the restoration of sanctions against the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and continued support for Ukraine's NATO aspirations. The U.S. established a strategic partnership committee with Ukraine, providing $60 million in security assistance. From Russia's perspective, these developments represent a significant threat from NATO's eastward expansion, prompting it to escalate military pressure along the Ukrainian border. Since March 2021, Russia has concentrated its forces from three directions: Belarus, eastern Ukraine, and Crimea, encircling Ukraine, creating a situation on the borders with Russia and Belarus that is fraught with tension. Russia demanded a written commitment that NATO would not deploy troops in former Soviet states without Moscow's approval and that Ukraine would not be allowed to join NATO. This demand was rejected by the US and NATO, who expressed a desire for continued negotiations while warning Russia against invading Ukraine, threatening devastating financial and economic sanctions if it did. In retaliation, Russia cut off some gas supply lines to Europe, and President Putin indicated in internal meetings that Russia would not back down, stating it would use military force if necessary to address NATO's eastward expansion and the Ukraine issue. However, on January 26, 2022, Russia, Ukraine, Germany, and France held talks in Paris under the Normandy format, resulting in an agreement for a temporary ceasefire while awaiting further negotiations. By February 16, after diplomatic efforts by the French and German presidents, there seemed to be some progress, as Russia announced a partial troop withdrawal.